So this is the third of three conversations, one about solitude, one about companionship, now about time. I had a hard time deciding on what word to use. I started with mortality. And then for a brief time, I thought I would have a couple of fourth graders in this group. And I thought, no, I'm not going to ask the fourth graders to talk about that. I changed it. So I changed it to time. And I think that's not bad. Um, so here we are. And here we are about to give pictures of time. And I'll give mine first. I have a watch, and it's an electric watch, and it costs $14. And I'm having a hard time reading the hands now because I have macular degeneration. And so I'm going to have to either get a larger faced watch or a digital watch with big letters, or something. So that is my picture of time right at the moment. So, John, what's your picture of time?
Well, I'll give you a recent picture, if I may. And yesterday, it's not bad. I sit down with three dear friends, two of whom have also taught in the English department here at Sewanee, and one has taught in the English department elsewhere. And what we do, I guess I'm going to live up to stereotype. We talk about literature every week. But in particular, the idea of time that comes through, we were talking about John Milton and Paradise Lost, that it never ceases to amaze and cheer me that one has such connection with people who have been dead for centuries. And those of us who love books and love literature realize that we can feel this enormous connection. And not only, of course, with writers, for me, for composers of the past. And there's on the positive light of time, just that sense that we're talking about this writer as though he were with us, because in a sense he is with us. And that is one of the graces, I think, of for me, literature and music, that they do live beyond the time in which they were composed, and there's a personal presence that we can all share across time.
It's a great example.
What about you, Faith? What's your picture of time?
You're asking me, Bruce?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, well, I realized that seeing what I have seen, recently, through COVID, Ukraine, my friend Amy Bloom, who's written a book called In Love about her husband's sudden onset of Alzheimer's at a very young age, and he chose to die. And they flew off to Zurich. And so I realized when I was finished reading it that I've always been very afraid to die, that I would run out of time and it would make me enter a lonely place. Death always seems so lonely. And I realized I don't feel that way anymore. I'm not as afraid to die.
What's on your mind, Steve?
Well, I was going to come back to astronomy because, we talked about the solitude of looking at the stars, but one of the amazing things about looking through a telescope, well, just actually, if you learn some stars, the stars, their light comes from us from so long ago, not just so far away. And for a while I was trying to, as I would look at the stars, I would do this exercise in my mind where I would look at the star and know how far it was and imagine what was happening at the time that the light that's reaching my eyes now, first came out of that star. And, Aldebaran, which is that star in the middle of Taurus, a kind of a reddish star, that's 63 light years away. And so the light that I'm seeing was coming from the day pretty much I was born. There's the Crab Nebula, which is light from a supernova that occurred in 1054. And you can, so when I look at that through the telescope, I'm seeing, a moment in history when astronomers first saw this thing burst out. There's Andromeda Galaxy, which is 2.5 million light years away, which means that at the when human beings were first starting to evolve from primates, at around that time, this light that's reaching me, that's how far away and long ago it is. But and so everywhere I look in the sky, you can, a place in space is also a place in time, and the sky around you becomes not just, usually it's two-dimensional. Usually it's like this field of stars, but if you know where everything is, it becomes three-dimensional. But if you know when everything is, it becomes this fourth-dimensional space that you're living in. But in all that, one picture actually comes to mind, which is kind of amazing. So I was at a telescope festival last summer. This is how deeply I got into astronomy within the course of a year and a half. I went to a telescope festival, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm with this guy that I just met, and we're really connecting over, stars and family and stuff. And he points his telescope up in Cassiopeia. There's a little double star. It's not very bright. It's about 19 light years away. And his son had committed suicide fairly recently, and he was still kind of trying to deal with it. And his son had been 19. And for him, when he looks up at the sky, he goes to this star and he feels some connection with his son and just with a way of being human. I don't know. It was so touching at 3 o'clock in the morning to be with this guy who I had just met and to look at the sky. And I can never look at those stars in quite the same way. And sometimes when I want to feel connected on a human level to this vast thing that's out there, I point my telescope up. Cassiopeia is almost always in the sky, and I look and I find that little double star. It's very tiny, and one's little orangish, one's a little bluish. There's a beautiful pair, and I don't know. It gives me a lot of comfort somehow.
Wow.
Barbara?
So it's hard to follow that. I think I was more thinking along Faith's perspective in terms of time kind of being aging, which is but I have been blessed with two grandsons who were born in December of 2020. 5 days apart. My daughter and my daughter-in-law each had babies 5 days apart. And watching them grow and seeing how the time seems to collapse, and yet it also kind of stretches out the days that I get to spend with them, where it's kind of, it's a very peculiar way for me to be spending time with somebody who doesn't speak, who's running around trying to learn things and trying to understand what's going on, and seeing how much they've changed from obviously when they first came home from the hospital to today, and what they're learning. And then on the other extreme, dealing with my mother-in-law, who I'd mentioned earlier, and my father and stepmother, who were in their 89 and 91. So watching the two ends of what we view as sort of the time spectrum with respect to mortality, Bruce, to the extent that that's what you're talking about, is a really, and my role, my place in that spectrum keeps shifting because of the importance of the people at either end of the spectrum and where I'm going to end up fitting. I'm starting to panic about what it's going to be like 5 years from now, when I'm probably going to be the end of the spectrum, much as I love those elders. And that's, to me, sort of the picture of time that I have right now, is this acceleration of growth of the babies, and then this peculiar acceleration of degeneration, so to speak, of shrinking of my father and my mother-in-law, who are both getting old, as am I, which I don't like, but I'm trying to fight it a lot more aggressively. So those are my pictures of time. They're human pictures, but I do love that concept, both the concept that Hugh, you brought up about, I mean, it's fascinating to imagine how far away and what that means. And then John, I've been thinking that the people who, I live in a house where everybody who ever lived here, almost everybody who ever lived here, is buried down the street. And I've been thinking about my great-grandfather and my other great-grandfather and my step-great-grandfather, who all were operating 100+ years ago, and trying to think about what it was like for them then, and trying to figure out if I could ever have connected them, which I can't. But just it becomes a time warp, which is kind of fun to think about what people were thinking 100 years ago.
Could I just throw in, from the, I was much engaged by these last two remarks, and your suggestion about the perspective that space-time gives us for our own lives. I find well worth reflecting on. And Barbara, your comment made me think of how these might fit together. We have a grandchild, 7 years old, living with us, and it amazes me to be able to share life with someone whose position and age and place in the world is so radically different. Who could have thought that we could share a life in that sense? So as I both look up at the stars and look at my granddaughter, I'm thinking together your two remarks, which both are meaningful to me.
So Hugh, I'm sorry, John, to what extent do you feel the same as your granddaughter? I ask the question because that's one of the things that it comes to me now. I always had a sense of it. It's stronger now. We are so as I'm seeing it now, we are, I don't want to say the same, but I do want to say the same.
Yes.
And looked at from here, I can't see your 7-year-old daughter, but granddaughter, but I feel the sameness when you describe your relationship with her.
Yes, I don't know if I would say exactly the same, Bruce, but I feel more of a shared connection than I would have thought, and it brings out parts of me that are not my normal waking self. So I think that's what strikes me in an unexpected way, perhaps.
Yeah. I was talking with a friend this morning about a novel I'm working on, and is now probably 8 years along. And I said to him that I had always worried about not finishing whatever work I'm in, dying in the middle of the work. And now I feel really quite the opposite. If I'm not in the middle of something when I die, then something has happened to me that is highly regrettable. I ought to die in the middle of this project.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I mean, it's really in some ways hard on me to think that we have to leave each other for the moment, but we do have to leave each other for the moment. And there may be people who look at this and want us to shut up so they can start talking. So maybe that's what we ought to do, but I'm looking for last words if we have any.
And Nicholas. Nicholas, you're muted.
I hear you now.
I said, I thank you for the time you gave to me or to us, time of, I would say, respectful togetherness, partnership in common values. At least I thought I have seen and mentioned, recognized some of them, and meaningful thoughts about our existence. And these 1.5 hours have prolonged my life. That I would say from that point of view, it's an additional 1.5 hours I got, and I'm really grateful for the time being together with you. And I regret that the time is over, And I would have been, it was such a wonderful speaking together without confrontation, or at least I have thoughts, you have not the same thoughts. And so that was really amazing. And I'm really grateful for being part of that. Thank you.
Okay, well, goodbye, everybody.
Let's do
Goodbye,
this.
Bruce. Goodbye, John.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, Hugh.
Bye-bye,
Goodbye,
everybody.
Faith. Goodbye,
Bye.
Nick. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.